Babak Yektafar, to our little podcast. Really a pleasure to have you here. We've been in touch over the years. You've been in Washington for a long time in various positions, in media and now with the Center for International Private Enterprise. I really want to learn more about your role, what you're doing there, and also your perspectives about what's going on in Iran. It's, our community is just exploding with anger and frustration and hope. And to the extent possible, I would like to govern a conversation that's objective and constructive so we can help this process. So with that, Babak, tell me about how you ended up in the role you're in now.
Well, thank you very much, Shahryar, for having me. Yes, we have known one another on and off over the years, and it's a pleasure to reconnect. Well, as you noted, I work for an NGO, a DC-based NGO called Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE. Just a little brief on CIPE before we move forward with our conversation. CIPE is, as I noted, an NGO that has two affiliations. The key affiliation is with U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the second affiliation is with National Endowment for Democracy. So in fact, we are a representative of U.S. Chamber of Commerce in this coalition around national NED. And others, the two-party systems have representation, as well as the labor unions have a representation in this collection as well. And as the affiliations may suggest, we work in that junction between the free market economy and the role of private sector as a key member of a society, and democratic principles. We work in many areas, including corruption or anti-corruption, for that matter, entrepreneurship, women's economic empowerment, property rights, and things of that nature. So even though some of our work is very similar to the kind of work that you would hear from the likes of World Bank and IMF, we don't necessarily, provide any kind of investment or funds of that nature. We just work with private sector of emerging markets and developing countries to create an environment where there is an inclusive and fair opportunity for all citizens to earn livelihood. So with that said, I kind of forgot if you had a question that
I do. I do, because you really touched on everything I'm interested in. International engagement and private enterprise with a country like Iran is a difficult topic, yes. Right? So in many circles, in policy circles in Washington, the first gut reaction to policymakers is to sanction a difficult country. Right. And I'd like to know, I guess, what the chamber or the CIPE's position is on sanctions in general, and then we'll go from there.
Well, but first of all, I have to say that we don't necessarily take positions when it comes to U.S. policy. I mean, U.S. policy is out there for everyone to assess based on their perception of what it should be, what the track record has been, and what could potentially be a good policy for the well-being of Americans as a whole. And of course, a lot of that is dependent on your, where you lean ideologically, and who you're affiliated with in terms of party politics and so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily the position that we take, but I mean, sanctions as a whole, when it comes to business community, is not always a solution. It can be a tool. However, it does have limitations, as we've seen on several occasions. But we don't. CIPE as a whole does not really take a position on any U.S. policy per se. And other than that, and I've been asked in the past couple of weeks, actually, by a number of people with regards to, how does this fit U.S. policy and where does it fall? Not only just Iran as a country, but within the regional Middle East outlook of the U.S. And to me, I've refused to answer that only because I think the situation that's going on in Iran, regardless of what the Iranian regime may frame it as, which is always, foreign interference, it's a matter that is strictly for Iranians, particularly those inside the country. I don't want to exclude those who are in diaspora. I think very often we also make that mistake. I think folks in diaspora do care deeply about the country. They have relatives. They may have interests inside the country. And so I think their opinion and their involvement is something that should be taken seriously, and it's valid. But having said that, this is strictly a matter for Iran and for Iranians. And I think what we see now is something that honestly has been brewing for a long time. The unfortunate death of Mahsa Amini was the catalyst for this latest round. But if anyone who follows the country, who's connected in some shape or form with the country, I believe the tension that has been growing between the society as a whole due to a number of reasons, economic, social, and environmental, and so on and so forth. I always felt that it was unattainable, it was unsustainable, and it would at some point get to a point that it would become explosive. Now, even if this round of protests are quelled and somehow dealt with, I just have a personal feeling that the next one is going to be even bigger and maybe even more detrimental. So we have to see, but that's why I don't particularly comment on U.S. policy, because I think this is very strictly an Iranian thing.
Right. No, I agree, and I think that's you pointed on a very important quality about what's happening in this conversation globally, and that is what I hear from a lot of Iranians is that, and Americans and policymakers, is that they want to leave Iran's business to itself. This is an internal matter. Of course, women's issues are global issues. Of course, women's empowerment and human rights are global issues. And I think a community is running around trying to figure out who's on their side and who's not on their side, right? And if you don't hate the regime just as much as we do, you must not be on our side. And there's a lot of that cancel culture going on in our community right now, and it's unfortunate. But you mentioned women's empowerment from a business standpoint, and maybe you could go into a little bit more about that as to what SIPE does, and maybe one day, if hopefully bridges are available, how could a group like SIPE help with women's empowerment issues in Iran?
Well, what I can tell, there are two things that I would like to share with you. Number one is that, you ask about SIPE's position on this. We did release a blog, which I co-wrote with a colleague of mine, and I'll be more than happy to share that with you. And essentially, what we looked at was how the participation of women in a country's economy. And when I say participation, I think the angle that we took with this blog is a rather free participation, not restricted participation, but a free participation of women in any given economy increases the output, the financial gain, and just about everything that adds to the quality of the life of a given country by such a high percentage that you cannot ignore it. And I think they should have that right to be able to participate freely, and this is not just about Iran. This is about every country that we work with. But the kind of work that we have done essentially in the past, and obviously because of who we are, we always take the economic empowerment angle as a way of an overall empowerment of women. And we do categorize women among the minorities. So, empowerment of women and minorities in a given society is really, again, to try and create an environment, be it addressing the legal and regulatory frameworks, or even traditional and societal beliefs, and how do we overturn those in a way that would make the acceptance of women and their participation in economic activities of a country something acceptable by the society and necessary. I mean, we have to point out that it is necessary and show, um, you know, statistics of making a business case for why women's participation is so important in the given country's economy. We've done this work. One of the last places that I worked before the unfortunate events was in Afghanistan. SIPE was responsible for the establishment of the only women's chamber of commerce in Afghanistan. And this was, to make sure that women were represented and also were beneficiaries of what was available for businesses as a whole, be it bids for government contracts, ability to open businesses without necessarily any additional restrictions on them, and so on and so forth. And so we've always been very proud of doing that. And I think that chamber, before the fall of the Afghan government to the Taliban last August, they were doing some great work, particularly in the underserved areas and provinces where the government really did not have the ability to function properly. And anything from establishing business resource centers, physical centers where women could bring their children, and there was a place for them to take care of the kids while they were going about doing their business or learning about how to promote their businesses. And most of these folks were home-based businesses, be it handicraft, be it cooking, be it what have you. But to also be able to connect them with networks where they could market their products and so on and so forth. And that's just one example of the kind of work that we do.
Right. So, I think the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway just for clarity, and that is, as of, based on the sanctions, you can't do anything with Iran.
Well, sanctions and other policy considerations makes it extremely difficult for us to be involved with Iran. In the past, we did try. This goes decades ago, but unfortunately, as you know, when things go wrong and the regime in Iran starts blaming all the
Western
foreign entities,
influences,
regardless of what their intention is or
right,
what they do, they all kind of group them into one
right,
little pot. We've decided at the moment it may not be the best move for us. We're watching and looking at as things develop, just like everybody else.
okay. But as so apart from not taking a position on sanctions and of course doing things consistent with U.S. policy, if there is an opening of some sort, SITE would be interested in helping with Iran and women's empowerment, economic development, all those things.
Well, the one thing that I should really stress here is that it's a SIPE model.
Right.
Unlike most organizations, and I did mention World Bank and IMF,
Right.
Unlike those folks, our model is very much a locally demanded and locally driven approach.
Got it.
So it's not us going to a given country and saying, hey, you have this problem, we have the solutions, and
Right.
here's how you do it. Someone from the inside would come up to us and say, hey, this is a problem we're having, and I think we know how to address this. Will you help us? And what we bring really is the 40 year of experience, the tools that we have developed when it comes to advocacy, for example, for businesses, and training for entrepreneurs and things of that nature, as well as the worldwide network that we have. And these networks over the years have proven to be extremely useful to those who have seek to be connected with these networks. So our approach is that. So to answer your question, if things, if we know nobody's going to be in danger just because they talked to a Washington-based organization and they say, hey, we have this problem, we think, we definitely could use your help and your network, and we think it's safe to do it, then there's no reason for us not to.
Right. Obviously, things are incredibly fluid and dangerous right now. People are fighting for fundamental rights and life and liberty issues. And I think all of us expatriates, we wish them all the success in the world. So this conversation is really a look ahead that
Right.
if things kind of evolve based on events on the ground, that the people of Iran have many, many choices for support and assistance, and especially women for their growth and development. That's on the horizon. That's kind of, I feel like, one of the things at stake is that if this protest evolves into a revolution and there is regime change, however which way the people of Iran decide it, then there's going to be, I think, a flood of international economic resources like SIPE, US included, that would be available to the people of Iran to help rebuild or expand their country in the way that they choose. Is there other groups like SIPE in the U.S. Or you mentioned World Bank, but anybody else do what SIPE does?
Um, I can't think of any that does it in the way that Stipe was intended to do it. And I say this with this explanation. When Stipe started 40 years ago, the idea was that a great deal of the challenges that developing countries and emerging markets face, even when it's a societal issue, has its roots in some economic matter. It's about the livelihood of citizens and the right to these to have access to what would provide their livelihoods for them. So economic matters was always that lens, that key from SIPE's perspective for development of a country, democratic development of a country. Now, there are a lot of organizations that approach developing countries with that democratic lens and the rights of people and human rights and so on and so forth. But now we're finding out over the past decade that a lot of them are also pointing to economy and private sector and the right to livelihood as a key component of that human right. So more and more of these organizations who are not necessarily established with that lens are now kind of coming into that lens that SIPE essentially started 40 years ago. So there are a lot of organizations, NGOs, either US-based or Western Europe-based, who are now working in that sort of private sector economic development space, even though that was not necessarily how and why they were established at the beginning. But SIPE, one of the reasons that I was attracted to it, had a very unique model. As I said, it wasn't just the angle, the lens of the economy, but this locally demanded, locally driven aspect of it that I found very interesting. So again, it wasn't us telling people what to do; it was them telling us what was a problem and just ask if we could provide them the experience and the tools that we have developed, and it was a very collaborative,
Right.
but locally driven
Right.
process.
Apart from the locally driven process and private enterprise, does SIPE have any insights or perspectives on big tech companies, communication companies, looking at the internet issues and social media issues? Does SIPE have any perspective on social media and big tech and how it can help help Iran right now, and then eventually in the future?
Well, again, the right now part of your question is problematic
Right.
because it's a matter of safety and security of Iranians, and to what extent will they get punished by the regime if they ever found out that there was any kind of a connection or conversation or
Sure.
or getting in touch with an American entity. SIPE's perspective, I should say my perspective, but someone who works at SIPE,
Sure.
really is that, as you may know, since the shutdown of internet in its various ways and social media, WhatsApp, and particularly Instagram.
Right.
Iran has essentially lost billions of dollars in businesses. And we're talking about, again, private sector here and a very robust and developing online business environment in Iran. And so now these companies, in fact, a couple of days ago, I was reading that there was an announcement that Balad, which is a navigation app in Iran, they had to let go of thousands of workers.
Wow.
Instagram in Iran is responsible for I don't know how many $1 billion annually, and the shutdown of Instagram has impacted a lot of these
Iranian companies, Iranian tech companies, that are losing money, losing jobs because of the internet, not just access.
Instagram is responsible for over 1 million direct hire of Iranians.
I did not know that.
And they are being impacted greatly, have been for the past 4 weeks. So again, our perspective is really from that business perspective and the livelihood of people and the ability to have access to an environment where they can grow that business and help others to the same kind of livelihood that everyone else around the world is entitled to and has access to. So that in itself poses a problem. Unfortunately, I think, and I've always said that it's an unfortunate aspect of the Islamic regime that they have kind of placed survival as the sole driver of their policies, be it domestic or international, that the fact that the country is losing so many of these businesses and so many billions of dollars because of these shutdowns and inability of folks to access social media, and that has been unfortunately the hallmark of what we've seen in terms of delivering services and creating an environment where a society with so much potential can grow. But yeah, that's essentially the way that we look at it.
Right. I did not know about the impact of that, the business impact, which frankly puts a tremendous downward pressure on the Iranian people, even more so than they already are dealing with on the streets from a life safety standpoint, but the economic pressure of not only the strikes that all the small shops have closed or are closing sporadically, but then add to it the online businesses that are suffering and immediately getting layoffs. That is even a bigger impact. So I don't know how long the people.
And again, these businesses, once they get to a point where they have to let go of folks, and a month or so goes on. I mean, it's very difficult to
come back,
restart and reestablish and come back. And so unfortunately, the immediate future for a lot of these entities does not look very.
And in general, the people that hire these types of the Iranian companies that hire, these are young, educated. The people that are on the streets are probably the same people that are working in tech, in the Iranian tech community, which is enormous, and there's tremendously talented. Just like you say, if they had the same access and the same rights as anybody else on the planet, I'm sure they would be just as successful as anybody in Silicon Valley. So that presents a real problem. Thank you for pointing that out. Babak, any final thoughts on, I know we both hope for the best, but any final perspectives or wishes of what you want to see in this conversation?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's in this conversation. My wish has always been the well-being of Iranians. As someone who was born there and partially raised in Iran, I have deep roots connected to Iran and Iranians. Every single time, of course, I haven't visited the country for some time now, but in the past when I did, it always broke my heart when you see people with a country with so much potential, anything from natural resources, forget about oil and gas and all that kind of stuff, but the human resources that's available there. I mean, Iran if it was managed properly, I mean, this country could be a major hub
Right,
of all sorts of activities
right,
in the region.
right,
And to see that not coming to fruition is always heartbreaking. So if there is anything that I would wish for is for that potential to be reached by the Iranians and by Iran. We'll have to see. I've always said it's kind of I've compared it to a balloon that is kind of, you inhale the balloon, but it's surrounded by this frame, a metallic or wooden frame. At some point, as the balloon, grows bigger, either the balloon has to give or the frame has to give. And we are there right now. Something has to give, unfortunately. And so we'll have to see. We
right.
have to see where we go with that.
Well said, Babak Yektafar from SIPE. I really appreciate your time, your insights, and I think you ended on an excellent point. The number one resource of Iran is not oil and gas, it's human capital, and those are the people that we believe in, and we wish great health and success and speed in self-determination. Thank you so much, Babak Yektafar. We'll
Thank
talk
you,
soon.
Sherry. I appreciate it.